Hey guys, Jake Danner here, and today I'm presenting you with my Draftkings and Fanduel NFL picks for Week 3. Now before we get started, I did want to show you guys one of the lineups that I made last week. And this lineup that I have pictured below is a lineup consisting of all the picks that were mentioned in my video last week, besides my flex play, which was Allen Hurns. This lineup was granted a fantasy point total of 155.04 points, which was enough to place in the DraftKings $1.6 million contest. So if you would have entered a lineup similar to this one using my picks last week, you would have made a profit. With that being said, let's move on to the picks for NFL Week 3. At quarterback this week, we have Aaron Rodgers going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. He has a DraftKings price of $7,300 and a FanDuel price of $9,300. The first thing that I like about this matchup is the fact that the Bengals have yet to see a quarterback with a talent that's close to Rodgers. Week 1, the Bengals went up against Joe Flacco, and then Week 2, the Bengals went up against Deshaun Watson. And these two quarterbacks are by no means elite, and I know there might be some debate over Joe Flacco, but when you're looking at fantasy perspective, he is by no means elite. And that right there is the main reason why I like Aaron Rodgers this week, as he is elite, and he's going up against a defense that has struggled both weeks this year, going up against quarterbacks and offenses that are relatively mediocre. Secondly, another reason why I like Aaron Rodgers is the fact that the Packers don't run the ball all too much, meaning that Rodgers will probably throw the ball like he always does, having 40-plus attempts per game, and this is huge going up against a defense that, as I've said before, has struggled this year. And finally, the Packers and Aaron Rodgers get a favorable matchup in their home field at Lambeau. Moving on to running back number 1, we have Ajayi of the Miami Dolphins going up against the New York Jets. He has a DraftKings price of $7,700 and a FanDuel price of $8,200. When looking at running backs for fantasy football, you want to look at the matchup and see, are they playing a team that will most likely be losing for most of the game? And I think this is very much the case here with the Miami Dolphins going up against the New York Jets. I believe that the Dolphins will take the lead early, hang on to that lead, and because of this, this constitutes more carries for Ajayi and the Miami Dolphins squad. And this is perfect for fantasy owners looking for someone who's going to get 25 to 30 plus touches and multiple touchdown upside. Secondly, if you're the Dolphins, you want to keep the ball in the hands of your trusted playmaker. Jay Cutler is new to the team and hasn't thrown the ball all too much last week, although I know they only played one game this season. Regardless of this, I think that Ajayi will be the guy, the go-to guy yet again, just like last week. And this is perfect going up against the Jets defense that has allowed the Buffalo Bills and the Oakland Raiders to run all over them. Lastly, Ajayi is another case of high volume, high upside. As I've said before, the Dolphins will likely be playing with the lead, which will constitute high amount of carries, which in turn leads to high upside for fantasy running backs. Moving on to running back number 2, we have Theo Riddick of the Detroit Lions going up against the Atlanta Falcons. He has a DraftKings price of $5,100 and a FanDuel price of $5,600. While his pricing is cheap, Theo Riddick is one of my favorite plays of this entire week. Atlanta has been torched by pass-catching backs out of the backfield in Week 1 with Tariq Cohen and Week 2 with Ty Montgomery coming out of the backfield. While Theo Riddick might not get you the rushing yards you're looking for, you're looking at a guy who will play those third down roles and the roles of comeback in the passing situations where he will collect a multitude of PPR points, possibly double-digit receptions, and it's not out of the question to have a 100-yard game when playing from behind, like I think they will be this week. At wide receiver number 1, we have another Dolphin, Jarvis Landry. He has a DraftKings price of $6,800 and a FanDuel price of $6,800. Last week, Jarvis Landry caught 13 to 15 targets against the LA Chargers. A stat line like this should continue this week against the Jets, who also own one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. Also, it is very apparent that Jay Cutler's go-to receiver is Landry. Nearly half of the passes thrown by Jay Cutler this season have gone to Landry, and I think that this trend should continue into this week. We're looking at another guy who is possibly bringing double-digit targets and receptions to the table. At wide receiver 2, we have Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. He has a DraftKings price of $5,600 and a FanDuel price of $6,800. Davante Adams is one of my favorite receivers this week, mainly because of his stackability with Aaron Rodgers, and I'm not really sure if stackability is a word, I guess, but I do like him with Aaron Rodgers, and that's my quarterback that I'm using for most of my lineups this week. And yes, Jordy Nelson is the number one over there, but we have to mix in some pricing. And also, Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb are banged up, leaving Adams the only healthy receiver of the top 3 wideouts in Green Bay. It's not out of the question for double-digit targets for Adams, much like last week, being the only healthy receiver of the top 3. With that being said, Adams serves as a key piece in a very high upside stack with Aaron Rodgers at home going against a weak Bengals defense. At wide receiver number 3, we have a Cleveland Browns player, Rashard Higgins, with a DraftKings price of $4,000 and a FanDuel price of $5,100. Normally, Isaiah Crowell is the only person on the Browns offense that is even remotely worthy of fantasy recognition. However, with the injury to Corey Coleman, the lack of production by Kenny Britt, and the tight ends on the Cleveland Browns offense, Rashard Higgins was forced into a more prominent role in the offense, and he did not disappoint. He caught 7 of 11 targets for 95 yards last week versus Baltimore, and this defense in Baltimore is much, much better than the defense that we're going to see this weekend against the Colts. If the targets stay up there, Rashard Higgins is in line for a monster week at a very, very low asking price, making him a great budget play and possibly a great pivot off of some more. At tight end this week, we have Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the New York Giants. He has a DraftKings price of $5,000 and a FanDuel price of $6,500. The Giants rank 30th in fantasy points allowed to tight ends so far in 2017. In Week 1, they got burnt by Jason Witten, and then in Week 2, they let up some solid numbers to Eric Ebron as well. Now, neither of the two guys that I mentioned before are the number one target on their team. However, Ertz is first in team receiving yardage and second in targets, meaning that he is in line for possibly an even bigger week than what we have seen the past 2 weeks against the Giants. Finally, the New York Giants have allowed a touchdown to tight ends in both of the first 2 contests. This trend should most certainly continue with Zach Ertz, who is the better tight end out of the 2 mentioned before. Now, this doesn't always work out that way, but he has huge upside against the New York Giants defense that has struggled so far. Staying in Philadelphia, we have the Eagles as our defense and special teams play of this week. They have a DraftKings price of $3,000 and a FanDuel price of $4,500. If you watched Monday Night Football this week, you saw the Detroit Lions absolutely obliterate the offensive line of the New York Giants. They simply cannot protect Eli Manning. And this is a huge reason why I like the Eagles' defense this week, as I believe that their pass rush is better than the Detroit Lions. And with that, we're talking lots of sacks, lots of pressure, and with pressure does come turnovers. Something else that's great about this matchup is the fact that the New York Giants offense is pretty one-dimensional. They have not been able to get it going on the ground whatsoever, meaning that the Eagles can focus on slowing down the receivers of the Giants this week. And that should not be too hard with the lack of production from Brandon Marshall, a banged-up Odell Beckham, and then a pretty solid Sterling Shepard. Finally, a little bit of stats that back up what I'm saying is New York Giants ranked 28th in yards per game and 30th in points per game, meaning that their offense has really not been getting it going, and you're not going to lose very many points using the Philadelphia Eagles defense. 4 points allowed against the Giants. To cap my picks off, we have a few additional picks for each position. At quarterback, I like either quarterback from the Panthers versus Saints game. If I had to pick one that I like more than the other, I would probably take Drew Brees going up against the Panthers, as he has more weapons and Cam Newton is without Greg Olsen. However, neither of these secondaries are very phenomenal, and I think that we might be looking at staying with the same game at running back. We have Christian McCaffrey going up against the Saints. Christian McCaffrey is excellent coming out of the backfield, and I think that this is the week that he finally breaks out in his rookie campaign, going up against a Saints defense that is, aforementioned, not very good. Our additional pick for wide receiver this week is AJ Green going up against the Packers. I will be playing AJ Green a decent amount this week in DFS, and I think that playing from behind, which the Bengals almost absolutely will be, AJ Green will be in line for a lot of targets in a game that the Bengals are trying to claw back in. Our secondary pick for tight end this week is Travis Kelce going up against the Chargers. Now, the only reason I have him as an additional pick is because of his price tag. He's a little bit more pricey, but in many cases he is worth it. He has high upside, 17 targets so far this season, 1 touchdown, and a monster week last week against the Philadelphia Eagles, so he does have that momentum going for him going into this week against the Chargers. Finally, my last pick overall is the Denver Broncos defense going up against the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills do not have that great of an offense, not very many receiving weapons, so I think that their focus will be on the run, and the Denver Broncos should be expecting it. They shut down Ezekiel Elliott last week for 9 rushes and 8 yards on those rushes. Sadly, Elliott was one of my picks mentioned last week. However, with our additional picks, we were able to get it done, and we had a solid NFL Week 2. And with our picks this week, I think we're in line for another solid week for NFL Week 3. Finally, if you have any comments, questions, or even disagreement with my picks, I'd love to chat in the comment section down below. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys soon.